Mark chapter 12.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus then sat down opposite the treasury, and he watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. And then a poor widow came along and put in 2 small copper coins, which were worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, and all she had to live on." The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. As I said at the beginning of our service, today is a festival day. Today is a day when we are gathering together to remember those who have gone before us, those who have died. Not just necessarily those who have died in the past year, but anybody who has died and gone to heaven. Those people who, through their lives and through the stories they told, have shaped us in many powerful ways. And today's a day when we come together to celebrate the lessons that they have left behind. Today isn't necessarily a day for mourning, although many can still be in the grief process, and that's okay. But it's more a day of remembering. Who are the people that you remember most? Who are the people that, when you think about what has happened in your lives, who are those? What did they do that was so special, that helped you to remember or helped you to grow in your faith in a powerful way? Take a moment to think back and to think of some of those people who have done something, maybe something very simple, but something very profound that shaped who you are. I was thinking back this week to the first church I ever went to. Many of you know that I did not grow up going to church at all, ever. And I started going to church on my own when I was 15 years old, to a local church in Lombard, Illinois. I picked it because it was a church I could easily get to as a 15-year-old. I didn't know anybody, and I went there, and I remember there was a number of people there that had just a tremendous impact on my life. But there was one man who helped me, especially in the subject of tithing and giving. And this is our stewardship month, and so I wanted to share a story about how I learned about giving. And this man, he was an older gentleman, and I was only 15 at the time, and he came up to me and he asked me if I was tithing. And I said, "Am I what?" I had no idea what that word meant. And I was fairly new to church. And when he realized that I had never understood about giving, he took time to help teach me over a series of months about what it meant to give. And the way he taught me was by sharing stories. He didn't say, "Well, you need to do this, and this." Once he recognized I didn't know what he did, all he did was share stories about how giving had shaped his life. And I remember one story. It's a funny story, and I wish he could be here. He passed away about 10, 15 years ago. He had this great way of telling it. It was this story about Thanksgiving and how he was supposed to, his whole purpose for Thanksgiving, his whole assignment from his wife for Thanksgiving was he was supposed to get the turkey. This is back in the 1930s. And so he had been saving and scrounging up money so that he could bring the turkey home for him and for his wife and for his family that was gathering in his little pit. So on Thanksgiving morning, he went to the butcher shop to buy a turkey. And he got there, and there was still a turkey left, and he was able to buy it. And as it was getting wrapped up, another woman came into the shop. And she put some money down on the counter and asked for a turkey. And the butcher had to tell her that there were no more turkeys left. But he looked at the money and he kind of laughed and said, "That ain't going to do it for you, ma'am." And so this man, George, who had been mentoring me, turned to her, and he basically tried to invite her to come to his place for Thanksgiving, and she wouldn't. She was having some people over, I guess, I'm not sure. And to make a long story short, he wound up giving the turkey to her so that she would have a turkey at Thanksgiving. And I remember him telling the story of what happened when he came home. And he had explained to his family and his children that there wouldn't be a turkey for Thanksgiving. And his wife's response was remarkable. She said, "Wonderful news. That means God has got an even better plan celebrate Thanksgiving. And they gathered the family together and they decided they were going to start a new tradition for them for Thanksgiving. And it was these powerful stories about how he had given and how they shaped who he was and how they shaped his family, especially because his children would often repeat that story for decades on end. Here he was, this was in the early 90s, he was an old man, and yet he still would tell about how when they get together for Thanksgiving, they would share the story about how Dad gave away the turkey on Thanksgiving morning. The New York Times recently had an article about the importance of teaching your children generosity. And they said that there are several ways you can teach generosity to your children. And they recommended, the guy who was doing this article recommended the 3-bucket technique, or the 3-jar technique. Is that you have 3 jars and you have your children split up the money amongst 3 jars. 1 jar is money that you're saving, 1 jar is money that you're spending, and the other jar is money that you're giving away. And then they said that the saving thing was pretty obvious, easy to teach your kids. You ask your child, what do you want to save your money towards? And they would write it on the jar. And then the spending one was obviously, they get to spend that whenever they want. But the last one, in this article in the New York Times, was talking about giving and how you teach your child how to be generous. And they said the important thing about that 3rd jar was to tell stories. Tell stories about how someone had been generous to you or to your family. And it was so important to tell stories to your children, not only about when you were in need, but how someone else blessed you. So that they would grow up understanding both the importance of being generous, but also what it was, what it meant, what a privilege it was to give and to help others. Today we grew up in a society, the author lamented, where we are so closed off, so private, that we're not even willing to tell our children about our financial struggles and about how other people might have been generous for us, for somehow it would be too shamey in your own children. And the sad thing about that was because we as a culture stopped sharing stories about how other people were generous with us, we have become less generous as a culture because generation has grown up not learning how to give. And it was amazing, and this reminded me of George, my friend who I met at this church when I first started going there, about how giving is so important, but how telling stories helps shape us and makes us generous people. And I was thinking about this week because this is All Saints Day. And the purpose of All Saints Day is for us to get together and to remember. But I think it's a little bit more than remembering. Because in remembering, it's important to share those stories of how you have been shaped, especially stories of generosity. We had 2 texts that we read for today, our New Testament text and our Gospel text. The Gospel text is a famous story about the widow and her 2 little pennies that she gets. Jesus had been teaching the crowds and his disciples about a number of important subjects that they just weren't getting, especially the subject of generosity. And so he sat down, and if you look at the context of the story, he's a bit disappointed with the disciples that they don't understand it. And so what does Jesus do? He's sitting there, being a little disappointed, and he notices this woman, and he immediately thinks, well, this is how I'm going to get the message across to my disciples. And he says, look at this woman who just gave at the temple. She just gave money into a box, a couple of boxes that they had, that everybody else was giving money to. And when other people, more rich people, would give money, they would trumpet their horns and they'd make grand announcements and they'd say, hey, look at me, I'm giving a big donation. Yet this woman comes forward and she has barely anything. Yet her gift was far more profound, far more life-changing. And the math doesn't add up. A big person, wealthy person gives $10,000 and a widow only gives 2 pennies. How is it that the widow's gift, its sacrifice, is more powerful? Because it's more life-changing for her. And because God uses the sacrifice she's making to shape other people. The disciples saw this. And they would remember this story that Jesus told them, that Jesus pointed out to them as they saw it take place live. And they would go and they would start telling everybody this story. Eventually, this story is going to be retold to the church in Macedonia. Now, the church in Macedonia, that was the New Testament passage we read. They were an incredibly poor church. And if you look at that 2 Corinthians 8 verse, it says, they took their joy and they mixed it with their poverty, and out of it gave this abundant giving that has been collected and given to feed the starving people in Jerusalem. Now, the church in Macedonia was a kind of a mix of cultures. It wasn't a Jewish church. It was a culture, a variety of different cultures, mostly Gentile people. But what was amazing for the church in Jerusalem is, why is this church in Macedonia that doesn't know them giving money to them? Well, because they had heard this story that the disciples were repeating about the generosity of that widow, and it had a powerful impact on them. And so they took their joy and they added it to their poverty, and the result was a tremendous outpouring of giving. It was incredible. This is the power of stories. And we, as a church, need to be willing to share stories about how others have been generous for us and pass those stories on to other people so that generosity can grow. And we need to take this story of this widow, which is a very familiar story, and we need to pass it on. Why? Through both our words and our actions, so that generosity can grow. And what's so important, and this is what the church of Macedonia learned, and this is what the disciples learned from that widow, was that generosity does not begin when you have abundance. Generosity begins now, despite your circumstances. Circumstances do not hold you back from being a generous person. Only your heart does, and your attitude. This widow, I doubt, had any idea that any of this was going on. Think about it. Jesus is sitting down. He just got done talking to the disciples. He was frustrated that they didn't get it. And he sees this widow doing this thing from afar. What does this widow do after she's done? She goes home. Probably continues to be ignored by society. She's a widow, after all. She probably has no clue that Jesus witnessed what she had done. She has no clue that the disciples hear the story from Jesus and then pass it on to the church of Macedonia, which then takes that story that shapes their lives so that they can feed the hungry in Jerusalem. She has no clue. And so often we think that the ways that we are generous have no impact, hardly at all. She probably went to her grave thinking, I've done probably nothing. But she had done something profound. And generation after generation after generation has been moved to giving because her story got retold over and over and over again. Think about what that can do. When you are like that widow, when you do the actions of generosity despite your circumstances, you might think that no one knows. But what God can do with that act is miraculous. It's amazing. And lives, the ripple effect of our actions, the power of the Holy Spirit can never be, what's the word I'm looking for? They're far bigger than we could ever imagine or dream. That's what generosity does. Amen?
Amen.
Our takeaways for today. The board's not working there, so I'm going to have to come up here so I can look at them with you guys. They're written on my paper over there. Our lives are stories that are the platform for powerful, life-changing lessons. Our lives are the platform for generosity, where the world can see and experience generosity that they don't encounter anywhere else. The second one, we need to tell stories of generosity, both God's generosity towards us and how that generosity flows through us. And the last one, our circumstances are not what stops us from being people of gratitude. Our heart is what stops us. This is the most powerful story that the world needs to hear, because it's a story that the world doesn't hear anywhere else. The message that the world tells us is that generosity begins only when you have abundance. And our whole theme for stewardship this month is to get us to realize that that is not true. It's joy when it's added to our poverty, brings about a giving and a generosity that the world can't imagine. And that generosity can shape and change people's lives. Amen. Let's stand up for our end of the day.